We are going to talk about the Cold War. We are Jonathan Amaya, Juliet Vega, Jose Chavez, and I, Laura Quintana. We are going to divide the presentation in some parts. First, we are going to talk about what the Cold War is. Then we are going to talk about some causes. We are going to talk then about some events. And after that, some effects. And finally, the conclusion. First, I'm going to tell you what the Cold War is. The Cold War is the conflict between the communist nations led by the Soviet Union and the democratic nation that is led by the United States. Okay, there is not an exact point where we can say, okay, the Cold War began this day. It started right after the Second World War. However, it is quite safe to say that it started when the President Truman from the United States declared an anti-communist policy in 1947. Now, we are going to talk about some causes. Let me tell you that the main reason why the Cold War was because the economic and political differences between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was, as I was telling you before, right after the Second World War. These differences were intensified as a result of their mutual suspicions immediately after the Second World War. Now I'm going to explain something about the ideological differences and economic and power causes. Then we are going to talk about other causes like the extension of Russia and also the reactions of the United States. Some of the ideological differences were that the United States government and the Soviet Union government were completely opposite. Well, in the United States, the people were able to select the representatives. In the Soviet Union, they were not able to select anybody. Another cause was the economic reason. While the United States wanted to encourage or to go and make a free trade, the Soviet Union didn't want that, and they wanted to protect their own economy. Another reason was the power rivalry. After the Second World War, with the decline of Europe, power was largely shared between the Soviet Union and the United States. So what happened? They were like big powers, and they were fighting each other. The final reason was that even if Russia was trying to expand their power, and the President of the United States was trying to threaten that power. So that's why, or those were some of the reasons or the causes why the Cold War began. Now we are going to talk about some events, and here is Jonathan.
Now I'm going to talk about the events that happened during the Cold War. There are some specific events, for example, the Iron Curtain, the Warsaw Pact, the Marshall Plan, and there were some wars like the Vietnam War and the Korean War that happened to create not a Cold War but a hot war. There were also some problems with the Cuban and Castro, but I'm going to talk specifically about the ending of the Cold War with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was after the World War II where the Allied powers and the Soviet Union divide the conquered Germany and separate between their countries. So one part were France, Great Britain and USA, and the other part was the Soviet Union. After there were some problems with the Allied powers and the Soviet Union that created some tension. After the three alliances, the USA, France, and Great Britain, where the Allied powers became as one part of the West Germany called the Federal Republic with the capital of Germany, Berlin. The west part was all controlled by the Allied powers, and the east part was by the Soviet Union. As the capital was in the center of the Soviet Union part, the West Berlin became as an island of democracy. And the creation of the Berlin Wall was the night of August 13, 1961. During 28 years, this wall was prevented that the people from the east part of the Germany and the east part of Berlin fleeing into the west side. The fall is a big important place in the time because it was when the people saw that the forces and the government of the East German thought that they were going to big fall and crash. As the communists began to flutter in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia in 1988 and 1989, new exodus points were opened to the East Germans who want to flee to the West. Then suddenly, on the evening of November 9, 1989, an announcement made by East German government official Gunter Schabowski stated, permanent relocation can be done through all border checkpoints between the GDR, the East Germany, into the PRG, the West Germany, or West Berlin. At this point, all the people was confused, like they are really open the border, and they're saying the truth. So mostly the people from the east side of Berlin walk through the border and see that the officials and the guards there let the people cross to the other side. So the people from the both sides of the Berlin start to accumulate and begin to. Some people began chipping at the Berlin Wall with hammers and chisels. There was an impromptu celebration along the Berlin Wall, with people hugging, kissing, singing, cheering, and even crying. The Berlin Wall was eventually chipped away into smaller pieces, some of the sides with coin and others as big slabs. The pieces have become collectibles and are stored in both homes and museums. After the Berlin Wall came down on the night of November 9 of 1989, Germany reunified into a single German state on October 3, 1990. Now my partner Jose is going to talk about the effects.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about the effects of the Cold War. Both the United States of America and the Soviet Union built up huge arsenals of atomic weapons and ballistic missiles. The nuclear arms race was central to the Cold War. Many feared where the Cold War was going, with the belief that the more nuclear weapons you had, the more powerful you were. Both America and Russia massively built up their stockpiles of nuclear weapons. The war greatly changed when the USA exploded the H-bomb in 1952. This one bomb was smaller in size than the Hiroshima atomic bomb, but 2,500 times more powerful. The Russians produced an H-bomb in 1953, and the war became a much more dangerous place. However, it is possible that the sheer power of these weapons and the fear that they evoked may have stopped a nuclear war. At the end of the 50s, American intelligence estimated that in a Russian missile attack, 20 million Americans will die and 20 million will be injured. By 1961, there were enough bombs to destroy the whole world. Now, I'll talk to you about NATO and the Warsaw Pact and when were they formed. NATO was formed when the countries of the Western Europe found themselves too weak politically and militarily to prevent the spread of the communist Iron Curtain on a national level. Very little time passed before this weakness was realized and Western Europe turned to a more inclusive North Atlantic Treaty, an agreement that involved a total of 12 nations, including the United States and the United Kingdom. NATO was officially established in April 4, 1949, with the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty. The Western Europe powers relied on the massive nuclear arsenal of the United States to deter a Soviet ground invasion. Now the Warsaw Pact. It was established 6 years after NATO. The Warsaw Pact was formed as a communist military alliance to maintain power over Eastern Europe. Although the ground forces possessed by the Warsaw Pact were far superior of those of NATO, their technology soon fell far behind after many democratic revolutions within the Warsaw Pact, and it was labeled non-existent in 1991. Finally, the fall of the Soviet Union. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, or USSR, was formally dissolved on December 25, 1991. This left all 15 republics of the Soviet Union as independent sovereign states. Its collapse was hailed by the West as victorian for freedom. The dissolution of the world's largest communist state also marked the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev introduced the two-tiered policy of reform. One level, he initiated the policy of glasnost, of freedom of speech. On the other level, he began a program of economic reform known as perestroika or rebuilding. Its collapse was hailed by the West as a victory for freedom, a triumph of democracy over totalitarianism, an evidence of the superiority of the capitalism over socialism. The disintegration of the Soviet Union began on the peripheries in the non-Russian areas. The first region to produce mass organized dissent was the Baltic region, where in 1987 the government of Estonia demanded autonomy. Now I'll leave you with Juliet. She's going to talk you about some other effects of the Cold War.
Now, knowing more about what really caused the Cold War and some effects and the main events occurred at this time, let's now discover some other effects. I mean, which were the consequences after war. For a better understanding, we will see the effects divided in 6 parts. To start, we take a look about the nuclear legacies, then the security legacies, the military legacies, one of the more affected, and continue with institutional legacies, and for finish, the economic legacies. Well, let's start with the Cold War nuclear effects. Although most of the people think that nuclear energy is one of the worst human inventions, some of the nuclear events in the Cold War were benign. For example, have you ever think about the great advantages for nuclear power energy? How many people use daily this kind of energy? A lot of. Millions and millions of people worldwide use daily for everything. Even the radiation after Cold War started being used for improving medical treatment health. The industrial production and technological development was speed up for nuclear bases at Cold War. However, everything can be good. The deployment of nuclear and ballistic missiles and defensive systems increased from this time and even do it. The proliferation was evident. Countries who didn't use nuclear weapons start testing, using, even producing them. From this time, there is a big problem with nuclear waste. There wasn't exist an established process about waste management and contamination and radiation levels increase in an uncontrollable way. New radiation signals were developed from these explosions. 334 different types of cancer, leukemia proliferations, genetic alterations between other horrible effects before nuclear explosions testing. Go on to another kind of Cold War effects. The effects talking about security can be summarized in models and strategies to be secure and protect the nuclear facilities and devices. An entire military nuclear infrastructure requires protection and financial help. It was understood after the critical consequences by governments in the world. Now, let's see military legacies. After every war, military effects are one of the more shocking. The military expenditures were total absurd. Just the USA have more than $8 trillion in military expenses. Do you know how much money developed countries budgeting for poverty? Just $50,000 million, just a 0.000 in comparison with military investment. Now, let's continue with institutional legacies. The measures of national defense, such as standing military and security forces and hardware, had adjusted and restricted after Cold War. Underhanded practice in the name of national security are no longer countenanced. The existence of many third world insurgents and interventions is now being encouraged as form cloak of secrecy unveils or their perpetrators confess. Finally, let's see something about economic legacies. Among the more specific consequences of the Cold War was a hard fiscal mortgage placed on domestic economies. Financial obligations include those necessary to avoid further dislocations, while the change took place from a wartime footing to a peacetime environment. National military establishment and alliance had to be reconfigured. Highly dependent institutional frameworks were to be restructured and new obligations were acquired by nations that once bystanders to East-West confrontations. In the wake of Cold War, fleet or new-founded nation inherited expenses, commitments, and resources for which they were not prepared. The successor states was also found themselves with contemporary nations, national security burdens, and substantial environmental contamination legacy, all to be financed while a new revised civilian economies had to be instituted. Finally, Jonathan is going to talk about a little bit about the conclusion.
Now the conclusion in the Soviet Union was conceptually and politically defensive. Launching a Cold War made no sense whatsoever, for Moscow was never projected before it became a reality. When it did, the Soviet interpretation could only place it within the old anti-fascist frame and the heroic narrative about the Great Patriotic War. Thus, Moscow saw the Cold War as fascist-like aggression to destroy the progressive achievements of the Soviet